Hi Gina.
Hi Ione, hi everyone, I'm Gina, the Senior Editor of Polyester.
And I'm Ione, the founding Editor-in-Chief of Polyester, and this is the Polyester Podcast, a feminist pop culture podcast dissecting the discourse on a weekly basis.
Before we start, if you're a fan of this podcast, please make sure to like, rate, subscribe and review. And if you really love us, you can sign up for a podcast membership where you can join our WhatsApp chat, get access to our research each week, and get on our Instagram close friends for only £3 a month. Do you have any reviews, Ione?
Yeah, we do. I don't know why you're saying that, just made me laugh.
Yeah, you literally just stared into my eyeballs and started laughing at me.
Because you were like looking at me really seriously like you're a newsreader.
I am being really serious. This is the serious portion.
Okay. 5 stars, intellectual and accessible. It's wonderful that this podcast manages to provide accessible and intellectually stimulating discourse on pop culture topics. I appreciate the way that the hosts zoom out to the bigger picture of how these topics impact society offline. I'm really glad I found it, and I'm enjoying working my way through past episodes. Smiley face. That is by M. Andre via Apple Podcasts in the US
so
of A.
much.
Thank you.
US of A.
What?
That's meant.
Why? Sorry.
If you're going to say of, you're going to say the of, you might as well just say United States of America.
People say the US of A, it's a thing. I haven't just made it up.
No, I know you haven't. It's just really retro.
Well, why not?
Why so?
I'm not trying to argue with you.
I am.
Yeah, I can tell. It's not fucking happening.
Okay, what are we talking about this week, Ione?
So today we are talking about lit girlies that read, reading when you're a girl, etc.
Girls that write as well.
Girls that write. I wouldn't know any of them.
I've never met one.
Me either.
Wouldn't want to.
No.
Scary, smelly.
But why are we talking about that today?
Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, I went to the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. Mm-hmm. I went twice actually in 1 week because it was so bloody good. And to see the rehang, so the mainstay collection, I feel like really pressure to use the correct words, but the mainstay collection, they've done a rehang, so they've changed how it sits in all the different galleries. Traditionally, you would do that through the lens of like Impressionist painters or like French painters in the 1800s, the 1850s or whatever. Like there's very like traditional modes of like how galleries are hung. If you've ever been to a museum and seen like the mainstay gallery, you've probably seen it formatted in that way, like here's all the Grecian art, here's loads of pots. But they've rehung 5 of the galleries to be based around themes. So there's one's called like interiors, one is called men looking at women, one of them is called migration. Can't remember the other 2 off the top of my head.
There's a landscape one, right?
Landscapes, possibly. And then another surprise 5th one that you'll have to go look at when you go there after this, listen to this. And then, so we were walking around and there was 2 rooms that really took my eye. So one of them was men looking at women. So it was all portraits of women, obviously, but like all the painters were men, and it's talking about like the way that the male gaze has like existed over the years. And then in the room next to it was the interiors room, which is like scenes from inside the home or inside like interior, obviously. And then part of that, like a part of the wall within the interiors gallery, had been dedicated to paintings of women reading, and it just made me really like interested, because I feel like there's a big thing about reading books that's happening on, I feel like it's been inspired by TikTok. Why are you laughing at me?
There's a big thing about reading books.
But no, I do think it's like had a resurgence. Like I feel like it was a big thing on Tumblr, like what books are you reading, like sharing quotes from books.
Do you think? I feel like books really weren't around for me on Tumblr.
Oh, it was huge on my Tumblr. And then I think there was like I had like oh my god, on my Tumblr I had an Amazon wishlist that was just books. And some like man in America obviously like cottoned onto it because I was like a fit young girl. I started sending loads of books to my house, and my mum and dad sat me down and were like, are you showing your boobs on the internet? You're underage, you can't be doing that. And I was like, no, I have a famous blog. It wasn't even famous. I think I had like 4,000 followers. I was like, no, I've got a blog and this man's sending me books, and I had to like show them, like obviously a sanitized version, like archive loads of shit. I was like, look, like I've got a blog, these people are just sending me things. And luckily my mum's like been on like the forums, makeup forums forever, so she kind of understood like where this was coming from. But yeah, my Tumblr was, which was kind of like what was nice about Tumblr, like people just had their niches, and part of it was I was very involved in like literary stuff on there. And then I feel like Instagram was so like image focused, and then TikTok has kind of brought us back to like having these conversations about books and reading. And then there's also like this zeitgeisty of like celebs that have been born from being authors that like all just kind of spark these kind of like thoughts for me, and then I was talking to Ione about it, who was obviously a very brilliant author with a book out. So I wanted to talk to her about like this zeitgeist of like why the literary it girl, the lit girl,
hot girl authors,
cool girl waxes her pussy raw and reads Hemingway. Like,
Jesus fucking Christ.
That's what she says in the film and in the book. And in the book.
And in the book.
If you've read the book.
I've read the book.
I love the book.
Yeah.
Where's the new book, actually, please? Gillian Flynn.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on. This is the most I've ever talked on my own.
On the podcast. Now she's running away wild with it.
Yeah, now it's Ione's turn to talk.
So, yeah, I feel like when we were kind of talking about what direction to take this episode in, it made sense, especially as I feel like it was interesting to be juxtaposed with like lots of historical images of women reading, as we're in like a reading renaissance. People are going to be like, oh, you're making it a trend, but as in like a renewed interest in reading. And also like a renewed cultural interest in reading, I would say. So Miu Miu just did this thing last weekend in London and maybe a couple of other cities where they were giving out books. They gave out books in Covent Garden that were like books to read on the beach, and it had a little luggage tag that said Miu Miu on it, and they did like ice lollies as well.
Yeah, and then like Valentino have done it previously where they took on, was it?
Valentino do the narrative, so it's like a huge part of their marketing basically. Like they sponsored the Booker Prize, which is like the big literary prize in England, in the UK probably. But then they also have that narratives campaign that they did with Emma Roberts' like book club. And then obviously we have like so many celeb book clubs, like Dua Lipa has one. Can't think of any other celebrities that have. Oh, like Reese Witherspoon's one's massive, isn't it?
Yeah.
And like Oprah, original book club girly.
Richard and
Judy. The Costa Coffee Book Club. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? When you think of book clubs, people of our generation think of like Richard and Judy.
Yeah, old farts.
Well, probably now people think of Dua Lipa, which is weird.
And then there's like the Aesop one as well for Pride.
Aesop, yeah, I actually got the PR through about that this morning, but I haven't looked at it. But they do like the Free Pride library where they give out books. So it's really interesting to think of like books as this like commodifiable or marketing, like additional marketing thing. Do you know what I mean? Like brands want to attract an audience that read.
Well, they want that marker of cool that like being a reader gives it.
But then it also makes you think how like it's easy to be cynical about that, I think. So there was this article in the research that is on Nylon, which is interesting because Nylon's like recently relaunched its print, which another article in this research goes into as well. And it's called like The Makings of a Literary It Girl by Sophia June on Nylon Mag. In the last few years, the traditional literary world has gotten a lot more fun. Parties aren't just thrown at bookstores that close at 9 p.m, but at punk bars and hotel ballrooms. They have custom merchandise, relevant DJs, and Botox.
And Botox. So funny.
I'm like, sorry, as if like older women writers aren't walking around with loads of Botox. Like, I'm sorry to say.
It's such like a snobby thing to be like, to go back to being like, these women who get Botox because they think they're cool. Fuck off. Like, how misogynistic.
So the piece kind of goes on to say that, so a literary it girl is basically savvy writers who are redefining what it means to market a book, and in doing so, tackling the challenges of self-preservation that every artist faced. People are kind of saying that, like, I think because literary it girls have been kind of maligned, like it's gone full circle, people thought they were cool, and then they were like, it's embarrassing, they care more about clothes than the art.
Yes, like they care more about like there being like their Instagram than like creating words that mean something to the audience.
But I also think books are such an interesting thing to talk about like as an industry, because even more so than like cinema, even more so than like fashion, even more so than fine art, people consider books to be like this really pure thing, like, oh, you're writing a book because you have like an intellectual pursuit of knowledge or whatever.
Yeah, you have something to say that needs to come out. It's creativity within you that needs to be expressed. It's kind of like how people talk about musicians as well.
And I think publishing is like really people don't really understand it because it's cloaked in like a lot of mystery and like secrecy as to how book publishing actually works. So I think that lends itself to that as well. Whereas, for example, like girls that are good at marketing their books, you never hear about that about a man, but you would never hear that about a man. B, there's such a thing in like the last decade of publishers seeking out writers that have a strong following of their own so they can market their own books, and so publishers don't have to spend as much money marketing, which is like bad, but that's like definitely happened to lots of people we know. Probably part of the reason why I got my book deal as well, because I like had Polyester to market it through. It's just like a reality of it.
Yeah, in my book proposal I had to like list all my outputs and like how many followers I had on there and like my connection to it and stuff. And then I feel like once a year you see like a Twitter thread going around being like, I wanted to get a book, they said I needed to get my Instagram followers up to 180k to get even like send a proposal out. And I think that will come down to like certain agents as well and certain publishers. Like it doesn't mean the whole industry's rotten, but it is probably like an easy way out to just choose these people and be like, you write a book and then we'll know that it'll sell because you've already got this audience that wants to buy something from you. And it's turned books into merch, which is kind of like interesting when you think of like, that's always been the case for celebrities. Like celebrity memoir has been a massive genre for like years and years and years and years. And now it's turned into like this thing, like, don't remember when Kendall and Kylie wrote like a fake fiction book? Yeah. Like, I feel like it's evolving into that. And I thought it was interesting in the research when someone's talking about like Italy. When someone's talking about Emily Ratajkowski and her book, and she's trying to like justify herself as something outside of being a model and like trying to write this book to serve the purpose of being like, no, I'm actually like smart and I actually have all these ideas and stuff. Whereas before, like, I feel like a celebrity memoir used to be more about like scandal.
Yeah, like secret.
Yeah, and being like, and then I was at Elton John's party and guess who was rimming someone in the shower? Like stuff like that. Sorry, that's such like a fucking obscene example. But do you know what I mean? Being like, when I was famous, I used to do so much coke and like all this coke that I did like rotted my brain. But then I went to rehab and then guess who was there? Fucking Bon Jovi. Like it used to be like so much more like sharing like celebrity gossip rather than like trying to like intellectualize themselves.
That's very true. So one of the things that like kicked this off was a couple of months ago, Jenny Zhang tweeted, how much of all this critic violence can we directly attribute to the phenomenon of being a literary it girl requiring the calculated decision to brand oneself in both reputation and in one's writing as a hot girl? I just finished reading an Eve Babbitt's book where she literally just, that's the whole book.
Yeah.
And she wrote that in the 70s. The whole thing is like, I'm such a gorgeous woman, but like, even gay men want to fuck me. By the way, I really like the book.
Yeah.
But it's not like this hasn't been like discovered with social media. Like women have been like, plus like, yeah, it's misogynistic to just be like. But
men have also been doing it, like that's what the whole fucking beat generation is. Like, what you on? Like Jack Kerouac was famous before On the Road and then it became like it's not that interesting that he went to like fucking live in a cabin and discovered what empathy was. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But like people were so like interested in the lore of these men who came together and found each other at university and they were all like artistically gifted and then it became its own thing, and that's like what, I don't know, the 60s. But yeah, it's like always been a thing. It's just now we've got social media to amplify that lens.
Yeah, you're right.
Thank you.
And I feel like, yeah, the pool of who you can speak to is much larger. So like, for example, like Rain Fisher Kwan or whatever might have been like a more underground, like girly in the New York scene if she was around in the 70s, but because she's around in 2024, hundreds of thousands of people know her work, and that's not a bad thing. Like, I feel like literature discussion can get really gatekeepy really quickly, but then also like there's so much actual snobbery around reading as well, where it's like, well, if you read a like Colleen Hoover but not a Joan Didion, then you don't actually read.
It's just this big fucking hook on things being cool, and as soon as something becomes popular, it stops being cool. Mm. But then, like, where does the it girl land in that? Because you need to be popular and cool. Like, those things are like,
oh gosh, how could we possibly know?
But you can't be both. I feel like that's like what's so hard about like trying to be either. And there's a bit in the.
It's in the D's Links one, which was by guest post by Princess Baby Girl, Substack writer, who was. The title is, the more effort and calculation put into the performance, the harder it becomes to portray oneself as one desires. So if you think it's giving Didion or Babbitt, you are delusional. And it's really good. I would definitely recommend reading it. But it's basically talking about how, I'll just read a bit. The algorithm has effectively democratized it girl and cool, making it deeply imitable and profitable. Figures like Emrata and Taylor Swift aspire to be seen as traditional writers, while would-be traditional writers aspire to the status of celebrities. Once an interesting girl's performance proves marketable enough to join the writer-influencer ranks, it's deemed cool, elevating her to the status of a literary it girl. A paradox arises here. Cool and it represent extreme polarities. Cool is a self-conscious pose and a branding scheme, while it embodies unself-consciousness. Identity performance, particularly in the realm of feminine public presentation, has a way of attenuating as it becomes more self-conscious. The more effort and calculation you put into the performance, the harder it becomes to portray oneself as one desires.
Yeah, like how do you seem effortless?
So the more you try, yeah, and she's going on by saying how like Caroline Calloway would call herself a Jesser, but really she's a Shoshana or Amani?
Amani, she's really Amani, and the same for like Taylor Swift, like she'd call herself a Shoshana, but she's Amani, like you're trying hard, and that's such Amani characteristic.
And with that, we are going to an ad break.
Bye-bye.
And we're back.
Back again. Sorry, I need to stop doing that. I just want to bring it back. It's like the first thing that my brain goes to.
But then I feel like so back to like talking about like the construction of reading as an it girl behaviour. It's interesting as well because, yeah, like me and you are talking about this now through the lens of voyeurism, which takes us back to the Fitzwilliam, in which all of those paintings are like voyeuristic paintings of men watching women reading.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting in the bit, like when they're talking about it, and then also in the research later on, is kind of saying that men particularly liked painting women reading, like it's his own specific genre, and it was because men are pervs. They wanted to like catch women out in this like very like, and it's funny like how reading has developed from being something that's so insular and personal, like a moment that men find it fun to like voyeuristic on. Whereas now it's something that it isn't personal, like it's become a brand, like a part of your brand to be a reader.
I think part of it is that education is gatekept, like in the actual true manner of the word. Like education was held hostage to women for so long. So in the Fitzwilliams like blurb on the section, it says like paintings of women reading chart how ideas around women's rights and education changed between the 1740s and 1920s. In the 1740s, female literacy in Europe was around 30% and reserved for daughters of wealthy families looking to improve their marriage prospects. By the 1920s, it was over 95% thanks to social and political reforms, more public libraries and paperback books. After the 1900s, images of women reading not only reflected these shifts in their educational opportunities, but illustrated their pursuit of broader emotional and intellectual freedoms. Kind of interesting, like, how reading should be more accessible than ever, like in a way, but currently the literary it girl arises at a time in which like public libraries are being closed. Education is like becoming harder to come by, like a solid education, like teachers are being like underfunded, schools are being underfunded, all of this kind of stuff.
Can't afford to go to uni anymore.
I saw a tweet earlier being like, I don't think they should actually teach literature in schools. They should just teach like the very basics of how to have a conversation. There's no point knowing what, like, who needs to know what pathetic fallacy is?
Oh my God, have you seen those, like, people going, I've seen it on, like, Instagram Reels, and so it was probably on TikTok, like, 6 months ago.
Fuck's sake.
But of those Facebook groups about people who, like, what's it called, when you teach your kids at home, homeschooling.
Yeah.
Wow, should I be talking about literacy? And there's whole, like, homeschooling groups where these women are doing like free range schooling, where they're like, if the kid picks it up, they'll tell them about it. Then they're like in these groups being like, is it bad that like Jason is 9 and can't read yet? And all the comments being like, no, he'll come naturally to wanting to read.
It's like, no.
No, you have to say kids down and make them do shit. I'm sorry, but you do. There's someone who like can't ride a bike and can't swim and can't do loads of things because my mum was like, fair enough, you don't want to, I'm not going to make it. You should force your kids to just do stuff, like have basic life skills.
Yeah, you do need to, please, anyone.
But yeah, reading is becoming inaccessible again. Mm-hmm. And even like, and it does boil down to like capitalism, like you can't afford to buy a book, you can't afford to buy a Kindle, all the shops are filled with shit, all the like charity shops are filled with shit. You can't get into schools anymore. The resources in schools are shit. You can't afford to go to uni anymore. Even then, like, how many kids are scrabbling for a book in the library that you need to, like, study for a course?
Even then, like, buying the books is so expensive. Like, I remember, like, a textbook when I was at uni, it was, like, I had a bursary for it because they were so expensive.
Yeah, it's insane. So, like, it's interesting that this reading is becoming the cool thing to do at a time when it's becoming less accessible to read.
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially as, like, these girls, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, because yeah, I think it can be like a very misogynistic reading to just be like, it's bad to have a nice dress and be a writer. Like, obviously that's not true, but it's interesting that they get Miu Miu brand deals, get Valentino brand deals. Also, I was in Valentino the narrative, so let's just say this. And yeah, it makes like it makes reading a luxury again, like back when only 30% of women were allowed to read, and that was to get a better husband. So it's quite dark, and I think, if anything, like, people are like, gatekeep again, like, BookTok shouldn't be a thing. It's like, no, like, who cares if people read shit books, like, as long as they read?
Yeah.
Also, I was saying to you the other day, do you remember? I was like, I've read loads of books now that I tried to read when I was 22 and I just fucking hated them.
Yeah.
And now I really like them because I am mature as a person.
Yeah, like, I'm ready to sit down with them. I think BookTok in like particular is like interesting in this way because it encourages like mass reading. Like, you go on Goodreads and people have like these reading lists of like wanting to read 150 books a year. The TikToks are like people got a stack of books and just flicking through them, being like, these are the books you need to read if you're a feral girly. And it's always like the same like 10 books, but like being like, you need to read these back like one after the other. You should read it in this order. Like, what do you mean you haven't read this? Like, it's even further gatekeeping because there's an article that we had on the Polyester site by Mia Autumn Rowe called Book Binging, Does Reading Too Much Ruin the Meaning? Where she's talking about like, you need reading also like requires time to reflect. Like, if you read like a whole book in a day, like, yeah, you've probably like binged through like the whole plot, but have you sat with like some of the sentences or like the themes that you're trying to like understand? And then she also made like a really, really great point where she's like, it's not just gatekeeping. Like, I can afford to buy all these books. I can afford to like spend time even making TikToks. The time element of it, like, who's got the time to read that much?
There's a really good like academic article in our research called Reading the Romance, Women, Patriarchy and Popular Literature by Janice A. Radway, published in the University of North Carolina Press. And it's kind of talking about as well how our attitudes to reading, or like the accessibility of reading, runs a direct tangent to women's liberation. So when the paperback was created, it was around the same time as Second Wave, and these things like built traction because, yeah, you give women books, they can have more independent thought, and these things are so like deeply aligned.
Yeah.
So in a way, if you're gatekeeping BookTok, it's actually just like weird alt-right behaviour.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting in that, is it called an article or an essay if it's scholarly? Either way. And that is kind of like being like, these figures that surround like chick literature, we see it as like, that's because women are asking for more of it, like, and that's like how these figures have like grown. We're really like, it makes sense to look at it from the other way around. Like, they're pumping out so much of this that is inescapable, so more women are reading it. Yeah,
it was like, I think it was in this bit where it says, Anne Douglas can argue in her widely quoted article Soft Porn Culture that the coincidence of the romance genre's increasing popularity with the rise of the women's movement must point to a new and developing backlash against feminism, because that new message is there in the text. She reasons those who repetitively buy romances must experience a more insistent need to receive it again and again and again. But I think it's the opposite, because women read and discover like what they like. Yeah. Or whether that's sexual or intellectual or social or whatever, that's how you develop your interests.
Yeah, exactly. And you can say, like, it's just so dismissive as well. Like, no one's ever saying, like, there's too many fucking Hobbit books. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
There's too many sci-fi books. There's too many of these, like, fucking long tomes that end up being fucking 14-part films. There's not too much fucking action books, thriller books, crime books. I do think, like, the new chick lit is feral girl fiction there.
What do you mean?
If we read Anne Douglas like at face value, that like women are seeking romance because that's reflective of what they think they need and want from society, it's like we've got to the point now where like we just want to like break free and go feral and go mental as women, because we've been like so like everything's just gotten so fucked and like convoluted.
What are some examples of that, would you say? Like Penance and stuff?
Yeah, Penance, I think Animal by Lisa Taddeo, My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Mm-hmm. Like, so many girls are like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Like, instead of it being like this allegory, being like, look how fucked we are, like that this could happen to like a woman, like even in a fictional sense. Whereas like so many people read those books and are like, me when I'm stressed. Like.
So to end, there is like a good text called When Men Reading, Women Reading by James Conlon, published by the University of Nebraska Press, where it says, what is surprising, especially considering the limited access women have had to literacy throughout history, is the number of images of women reading. Male artists have been drawn to this image out of all proportion to the frequency of its occurrence in daily life. Why is this? Why has the sight of a woman reading elicited such sustained and careful attention, both from male artists and the mostly male viewers who influence their production? What exactly does this sight do to the male psyche, or in other words, how do men read women reading. And it goes on to say, in patriarchal culture then, the woman reading any woman genuinely engaged in a text can only be threatening to men. The book takes her out of the conventional world of male dominance and places her in a textual world where pleasure and wisdom are literally in her own hands. The story of the Annunciation works to clarify and intensify this radical freedom, since in that scene, men are unnecessary not just for pleasure and wisdom, but even for children. I don't understand what the rest of this is, but I feel like that's very true. And especially with what you were saying, like maybe that's why there's even more of a backlash to like literary it girls now, because like if we're all reading books that are literally about like life without men or like doing unhinged things, then that's even more of a like, not to be like, we are the granddaughters of the witches you couldn't burn, but that's even more of a like, you know, a threat to patriarchy.
Yeah, it's in this bit, it's like in the same essay it says, the images of women reading follow the standard iconographic patterns for representing women, that is, they are represented without a desire of their own. But like that's why they've painted them in this way where it feels so voyeuristic. When a man is represented as reading in these kinds of artworks, like in places like the Fitzwilliam Museum, the book is a sign of professional wisdom. And in the paintings in the Fitzwilliam, it was very much like the second part of the sentence, which is when the woman is represented reading, she is usually in a leisurely setting, she reads a magazine or romance novel, and then it just goes on, like she's seen as just like having like a quiet moment to herself rather than like doing something that's like powerful, because if you represented the woman reading as powerful, then you're showing her like as powerful on her own. She doesn't need like that male influence.
And I think final note, I suppose, is that it's like so interesting to have art grouped in this way that like elicits such thoughts rather than just seeing them by like time period or by whatever. Like seeing them thematically curated does like allow us to trace the steps between like then and now, especially it really, historical, like if we're looking at historical works.
Yeah, when seeing like such contemporary works against like historical works just made me really like feel emotional. Like it just made me be like, whoa, we're all just it just made me be like, oh, we're all like people at the end of the day.
Fucking hell.
We're all just like people being together, like having the same feelings over and over.
True. Well, thank you to the Fitzwilliam.
And we all just fucking love reading books.
Thank you to the Fitzwilliam for partnering with us on this episode.
Yes, thank you, Nat and Marie in particular from the Fitzwilliam.
We really enjoyed it.
Yeah, had the best time. You really should go out to Cambridge. It's a lovely day out. And while you're there, go to... Also, it's fucking massive in there. It's huge. There's loads of mad shit going on. And I was like, even the entrance hall was just like fab on its own. I felt like I was like, you know, like when you go somewhere like Grand on holiday. I had the best time. I'll definitely be back to like Nosy Round more. Or, like the other stuff.
Thank you to Siham for the research, Charlotte for sound teching, Olivia for editing, and to Gina for co-hosting.
Thank you, Ione, for hosting.
And all the listeners for listening. What? What's that funny?
Like fucking Palamori. And you at home for being really good today.
We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.